It is Monday 8th of August and I need to rattle off a couple of quick ones because wasn't feeling too good yesterday, bit of a rubbish head, bit of a headache, so I need to get myself back on track and slightly ahead of myself. So, excuse the teeth. I'm going to do two, but then need to upload one fairly sharpish. So so annoyed am I at getting with the internet speed in my house, the fact that it's taken me like 2 hours to upload one of these videos. I've now signed up to Fiverr, so hopefully in a couple of weeks time it's going to take a lot quicker to get them up onto YouTube. Of course it's not going to help when I've got a 10-minute video, 7 of which is me trying to open this damn bottle. Come on, right. So this one, Glencadam, which was very kindly donated to me by Ian Forteith, who is a brand ambassador, I think is his title, for Angus Dundee himself. But I'll get to Angus Dundee in a second. The distillery itself was founded in 1825 and they started production in 1827. And it was by a guy called George Cooper, but the distillery was bought fairly shortly after, almost like within a year of it opening, by a guy called David Scott. But it had multiple owners. Basically between 1837 and 1891, it seemed like every couple of years there'd be somebody buying it and it being bought by somebody else and running out of money and this and that and the other. So in 1891 it was then bought by a company called Gilmore, Thompson and Co., which were a blending company, and they owned it for just over 50 years until 1954 when Hiram Walker, however you pronounce his name, the whiskey entrepreneur, bought it. And it eventually became, because Hiram Walker owned Ballantyne's, it became part of Allied de Mec in the late 70s, I think it was. And Allied de Mec were quite a big company. Of the day, they were almost like the Diageo of its day. But everything fell by the wayside, and in 2000, Angus Dundee. In 2000, Allied de Mec decided that Allied de Mec were already in that point going through some difficulties themselves, and they basically decided that Glencadam, that it was producing too much. It was going into blends, predominantly Ballantyne's, but they were making too much of it, and it was like, we've got too much stock, we don't need to make this much, and they mothballed it. So it fell silent, didn't do anything with it, and then Angus Dundee, which are, despite the name Angus Dundee, it's about as Scottish as you could get. Angus Dundee, you might as well have Muck Dundee in there somewhere. Oh no, Mick Dundee, that was Crocodile Dundee, wasn't it? Anyway, but they're actually London based. They were a blending company and a whiskey producer, but based down in London. And they bought the distillery, and I think at the time that they bought Glencadam, they were already owners of Tomintoul, which I will get to later in the challenge because that's in Speyside, and reopened the distillery, and from all intents and purposes did a very, very good job of it. They revamped the range in 2008. And this is what the bottle looks like now. So it was, I think the standard bottling Glencadam was a 15-year-old, because I can remember selling that when I was working at the whiskey shop. And then they changed to the bottle that you've just seen now. So the standard is now a 10-year-old, whereas it used to be a 15. Now, I could already tell from the colour, which you can probably see there, I've got really itchy nose, I think it's old hay fever's kicking in. I think this is pretty safe to say that it's not had any colouring added to it, because it's really, really pale. You're talking kind of like a lemony white wine. You know, we're talking sort of Sauvignon Blanc type white wine colour here. Really, really pale. Don't know what it's matured in terms of the casks. Willing to bet not heavily sherried or anything like that. Not like a first fill, but really, really pale colour. Now, also interestingly about this, you've got a still, and you've got like a pot still, standard pot still shape, it's big and bulbous at the bottom, which is where all the mash goes in and it boils up, and you tend to have like a little bubble in the middle of it, and then it goes up and tapers and then runs off, and all the spirit runs in this, it's called a swan neck traditionally, and it runs off down to the bottom, and all the spirit runs off. At Glencadam, it doesn't actually go downwards, it goes 15 degrees up. So what happens is it's something called reflux, and it's also if the still is very tall, the alcoholic vapours evaporate upwards, and what they'll do is when they get to the top, it condenses back into a liquid from a vapour, and then it runs off. Now, if the still is very tall, some of that vapour is actually too heavy to get to the top to condense, and it falls back down, and it's called reflux in that it sort of gets like redistilled, so you get like a purer whiskey. Now, what happens with the Glencadam still is because it's going 15 degrees, it's not a lot, and it's very, very slightly up, is as it's condensing, it will go along, but some of it will also start to roll back. So vapours will be going and condensing and then start to roll off, but quite a bit of it is actually going to be going back into the still and essentially redistillating. So you've got theoretically a purer, cleaner core spirit that's running off. So I honestly can't remember what the 15-year-old was like. I know I tried it. I get the feeling that I wasn't that enamoured with it. It was just a bit ordinary, but never had the 10-year-old. Really intrigued to see what it's like. Really intrigued, after reading about the still and also by this colour. It's 46%. You're looking at about, Whisky Exchange is selling it for 34 quid. So anywhere between 30 and 35 quid, which at this day and age is about standard. You're looking at a single malt whisky Scotch, £30 upwards. It used to be maybe 20, 25 upwards, but to be honest, now with inflation and prices going up and like that, you're looking realistically 30 quid upwards, 25 quid if it's on a deal. So interesting. It's clean and it's fresh, but it's got a real hazelnut character to it as well. It's almost like a peanut brittle, along with nettles. And there's a really good spiciness to it as well, but it's a very gentle spiciness, and it's slightly kind of cardamom-y. Really fragrant, but there's a bit of heat to it as well. 46%. It's not massively powerful, but you can sort of tell this is 46%. But there's a definite... What happened there? You slip. There's there's definite hazelnuts and a slight, it's not even a mild curried spice, it's a slightly dry curry spice. Not too overpowering. And then nettles, definitely nettles as well. Very unusual. That nettliness actually carries on, and that nuttiness. How strange. It's pleasant, it's very pleasant indeed, but it's really unusual. It's quite drying, but it's not a woody, oaky dryness. It's really hard to describe actually. It really does dry your mouth up, but it's sort of like a grassiness rather than like it's overly oaked or anything like that. This is really... It dries your mouth, but it kind of makes your mouth water at the same time. It's really odd to describe. It's a very, very unusual whiskey. And there's a real spiciness to it, but it's a very dry spice. And it is quite grassy and quite hay-like as well, but it's not damp hay like the Theticam was the other night, which was quite unpleasant. This is really distinctive, really unusual, and quite un-Scotch-like. It's not malty or sherried or peaty or anything. It's really, really distinctive and unusual in a very, very good way, and just it's unlike any other Scotch I've had so far. Now I know I've got plenty to go in the challenge, but that is very interesting, and that would throw you on a blind tasting. That really would. Now, I'd be very intrigued to know what the older bottlings are like, because I think there is a youthful character in there that it's not necessarily masking it, but it feels like it's a little bit tight and a little bit like there are some flavours in there that need to open up I'd be really intrigued to know what some of the older bottlings, older versions are like, to sort of see it almost like a vertical tasting. I think of this would be really interesting, because there are some cracking flavours in here which aren't like anything else in Scotch. Really distinctive, unusual, not really floral, but just, it's not spring-like, it's kind of summer-like in terms of it's fields of hay and corn and dryness and dry heat. It's really, really distinctive, and I'm liking this a lot. And I think in a blind tasting that would throw you. You could have that in a blind tasting in amongst other Scotch and go, right, where's that from? That's an absolute cracker. That's really, really good stuff. Really distinctive, and I like the ones that stand out. I like the distinctive, unusual ones, especially when they're good as well, and this is very, very good indeed. If you can find this for about 30 quid, I think you're onto a winner. It might be a bit of a risk as a present. If you're giving it to somebody who's like a hardcore whiskey drinker, a whiskey connoisseur who knows what they like, this is probably they're probably going to try this and go, I'm not too sure about this, because they like their heavily sherried Space Hides or anything like that. But if you're buying it for a present for somebody that actually wants to try some slightly different stuff, bang on, absolutely bang on, really good. Ian, thank you very much for that. I think you sent me another Glencadam, or was it a Tomintoul? I can't remember, but yes, I do not envy you. In fact, I do envy you. What do I mean? I do envy you with the job that you've got selling that, because that is an absolute cracker, and I think that is really, really interesting, and it must be a lot of fun doing whiskey tastings and events, getting people to try that, because I can imagine you get a lot of surprised people having that. Excellent stuff. Right, quick rinse out, and then we'll crack on with the next one. Cheers.